Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I'm a senior world designer on Lord of the Rings Online, and I go by Scenario on the message boards. And today we're here to do the final landscape preview for the Kingdoms of Harad expansion pack. It's actually not much of a landscape preview. There are a couple of bits on the landscape that we're going to pop around to, but by and large, this stream is going to be all about instances, dungeons, interiors, all of the places that you go into as part of Kingdom of Harad. There are a few that we're holding back because we don't want to spoil the stories that are happening inside those spaces. But by and large, we're going to bop through all the different regions and take a look at the interior spaces that are coming along with them. In addition to that, there are a couple of landscape previews that we're going to do where you may be looking at the backdrop right now and being like, hey, this isn't Merjala. No, this is actually the city of Umbar Baharbel because there is an update that is happening to a portion of this city as part of the expansion pack that I wanted to show off. And then we'll head on over to Zajana. For those of you that have never joined in on one of these streams before, this is a world and level design focused stream where I'm talking about what goes into making the landscape and world of Middle-earth in Lord of the Rings Online. I'm happy to answer questions about that, about what goes into building levels, building the landscape, the pre-production work that we put into that to bring these landscapes to life. I'm not going to be able to answer questions about things that are outside of my wheelhouse. So things like class balance, lag, PBMP, even crafting and whatnot outside of things like resource nodes, outside of my purview, and I'm not going to be able to answer those questions for you. But you can always jump into Court of the Ring on Friday to ask your questions, as well as just drop into the message boards and Discord if you have questions as well, and perhaps someone who is better suited to answering those questions can answer them there. Also, I tend to talk on a lot, so if you haven't had me take a drink of my tea or my seltzer at some point, please remind me to do so, because otherwise I will just get involved in talking with you all. So, to kick things off today, here we are in the city of Umbar, and you thought you were all done with it, but there is a reason to come back here. Let me make sure my run is where I want it to be, because we got a whole bunch of assets for the Tememir dwarves. Originally, the Shoreward Stone, which is where we're at right now, was intended to be a Tememir style place, and we had a bunch of concept artwork and whatnot developed for their style. And unfortunately, didn't have the time to get it in for last expansion pack, or even for Corsairs of Umbar. But now we do have the new style, so we went through and we updated the Shoreward Stone to include the new styles of textures and whatnot that go along with the Tememir. So just wanted to do a quick pop in here in case people were like, oh, hey, I thought something looked different. It's like, yep, this is the change. You know, they've got kind of the more inlaid purple stone as opposed to, I think this was mostly grays and whatnot before. So, but yeah, so this will be updated as part of update 46 as well. All right, so we'll make our way back down here, and then we'll head over to Zajana. Again, always happy to answer questions, so please feel free to drop them in if you have any of them. Otherwise, we'll just continue our tour through things. So let me get my next location queued up here. Alrighty. As I mentioned before too, in previous streams, this is a in development build. So I would caution and urge everyone looking at this to enter with the expectations that, you know, things are going to change. We are deep in our polish modes right now, for at least for the world side of things. So if there are places that we're looking at that seem like, oh, hey, that's not the right asset, or we're missing, you know, animations or something, or if a place just doesn't feel like its final lighting or deco is done, that's kind of where we're at in the process now. We work in layers. You know, we want to make sure that the spaces that we build for the gameplay, first and foremost, work. And then after that, we move into doing our polish. The hope is that, by the time we get to polish, the content designers, quest designers, and whatnot, they've already done their placement. So the quest NPCs, the quest objects, and whatnot are where they're supposed to be. And it frees us up to get into those spaces to do the work that we need to do as far as finishing up on polish. So Zhajana is a perfect example of that. This is one of the major cities for the expansion pack, and we are currently in our polish phase on this, going through adding deco, adding detail, really kind of finalizing the sculpting for it. You can see up here in the distance, we've got mountains that need to have their painting finished. So that is kind of where we're at with things. You can also see as we approach, you're going to see buildings pop in. And that's because, those buildings, those structures have not been hit with their far view pass yet. Oh, and here they go. So the idea being is as part of our polish passes and we go through, we're going to do things like those towers and buildings and whatnot. We're going to hit them with properties that allow them to be visible out at a greater distance. Thangdrim says, the blue is really nice. One of the things that I've really enjoyed about Umbar, Ikorban, and now Murjala is the architectural styles that we have in these regions. The colors that are coming with them are really, they're not colors that we get to play with all that often. And we don't get to see these colors all that often in these kinds of settings. I think the Gondorian and Numenorian structures are very like white marble, sometimes a little yellow, and so color is not something that those kinds of structures had a lot to them. It was either super dark or white. And coming into these regions, Umbar, Ikorban, and Murjala, it's really awesome to be able to be in a space where we have kind of such a variety of different colors in the structures, whether it's the awnings that we have here, the buildings with the turquoises and blue. It's something that, you get so used to working in and building in a certain style, and then you get these kind of tools to work with, and I never realized how much I was missing. So here we are in some of the courtyards and whatnot, and I believe the idea behind Zhajana is to kind of take what we learned from building the city of Umbar, kind of streamline things a little bit more, make things not as challenging to navigate as they can be in some places, but also incorporate aspects of the aspects of the city that were kind of like different from what we've done in other cities, and that's by and large introducing things like combat within those cities. So we have a portion of this that is designed as a monster camp, but I think the idea being, whereas before a lot of in the city of Umbar, a lot of our traversal through the city, a lot of the questing through the city would take you from non-combat spaces, and you kind of have to run through a combat space in order to get somewhere. Or if you are a lower level character, you kind of get teleported into areas where combat is very close by, and that can be problematic. So our hope is with what we're doing here in Zhajana is to have components of it that are, combat enabled, so that it will be treated like a monster camp. But try not to kind of have those areas be thoroughfare spaces. Not have those areas be places where you're going from one side to the other, and the only way to get through is to fight. Kind of more pushing the areas where there are going to be combat and off to the sides, off to the edges, so that it's not really impeding on your progression through a space. So we're coming up here. So this is the southern gate. The nether gate, I believe, is what it's called. And that will bar your access to regions further south. I know there's a lot of curiosity and interest about what is south of Harad. And, our current working plan and concept is it's the desert. If you were to go out this gate, you would go down a hill and the desert would be sprawling out before you. So that's kind of the goal and intention for this entry point, should we ever go in that direction. I wonder if looks like, oh, there's a wall there. I can't get any further. So yeah, the continuing of our, path through regions and also leaving little like tidbits of, this is where, this region could grow kind of thing in it as we're moving along. I really enjoy, I think one of the things too that is a lot of fun about working in this region is we got a lot of structural assets that come in shape forms that we've never had before, and being able to build with those shape forms is really just like exciting and interesting and appealing. The general like ability for us to portray shapes and arches and just like base structures that we haven't had before, like it makes me want to like push variants of these kinds of structures more. Like we've got the white and the red and the black Shigani structures, but think about like what other textural treatments we could give them to give these assets a continued life in LOTRO, so that we're not just using them here and only here. They're things that we can look at in terms of the silhouettes they produce and the shapes they produce, and how we can keep those assets as like living, breathing assets through the life of the game. All right, let's see if there are any questions I can pop in and answer real quick. We need cool bluish Harad housing. That is, so I don't know that Harad housing will be in our near future, but I definitely am interested in producing housing based off of based out of Umbar. And we've got it's a lot of those same kinds of shape forms that you can find here, which is something that is really like interesting and compelling to me. And honestly, like with some of these colors, like that's also asking for us to look into, what other new dye colors and whatnot can we produce that can go along with the visual language of these spaces. So. Mario Justin says, hello, forgot about daylight savings change. I thought this was still an hour. There's still an hour. Oops. Yeah, the daylight savings to me, at least here in the US, we almost got rid of it. We almost got rid of it. I would be completely happy if instead of the, twice a year time change, we just set the clocks back 30 minutes and then are just like, okay, and that's it. No more time changes ever. So as you can see here, it looked like there were guards. I wonder, yeah. So we've got mobs guarding the entrance here. So I would fully expect that this is one of the more monster campy style spaces. I'm not the designer of this space. I'm just giving a preview. And like I said too, if this looks a little like empty and unlived in, it's because we are deep in our polish and deco pass on things. It's important for us to have the base structure down so that when designers need to come in and do quest placement, they can do that kind of quest placement. And then we can come in and layer our own stuff. Like, I honestly would not be surprised if like the terrain textures changes happen throughout here as well, because we do have a number of new road textures and whatnot that were introduced as part of this, so it makes sense to kind of find room to use those things as well. Imagor says, in my honest opinion, way too exotic buildings. Buildings near desert wasted water don't need to have such eye candy colors. I think there certainly is credit to that. However, I do think it is also important to make sure that what we're making stands out as interesting and has a life to it. When the region around the city has kind of a lifelessness to it, and not to say that Kijan is lifeless, but it is more of a arid nature. You want something to visually draw your eye to a space and get you excited about it. And there are aspects of the city itself. It is the city of scholars, so it does make sense from that perspective that things might look a little bit more opulent, things might look a little bit more colorful, to go along with that when this is the home of scholars and artists and whatnot. So yeah, that is our tour of Zajana. Continuing to work on this, we will have, I think we've got a bull roar. If it's not open yet, it will be opened soon, I think, but don't quote me on that. Now everyone's going to quote me on that. At which point you'll be able to get into Kijan in general and Zajana by proxy of that. So if you happen to come into this region, into this area, and you're running around, my biggest recommendation is, if it looks like it is not finished, it is likely not finished, and I would not stress too much about filing bugs or reporting those issues as you see them. When areas like this are in heavy development or in polish, we kind of expect that there is going to be work remaining to be done in them. That First Age Artist says, which team creates the 3D assets and the textures that you use to populate and design the area? Is it you scenario or others from your team or a different one? So we have several teams working on LOTRO. We're all one big team, but we all have our own disciplines within them. We have content designers who are generally responsible for creating the quests and instances. We have the world designers who are responsible for building the landscape and the dungeon spaces, at least the visuals of them, as well as some game system stuff associated with that. We've got the game systems designers who are responsible for developing our items and skills and gameplay systems. We have our art team who creates the artwork, creates the objects that we as the world team then go about placing. We have our engineers who are responsible for a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that is not necessarily player facing, but the result of their work is impacts the player experience. So we have all of these different teams. Generally our workflow is our artists will create the assets, so the towers, the fountains, the fences, the bushes, and whatnot, and then they will hand them off to us, and we will place them where we need to place them for our spaces. Some of us do dabble and basically multi-class. Like I have a background in art. I do a lot of world design. I do some artwork. I do some game system stuff. So especially with the team our size and the product being the age that it is, a lot of people, especially people who have been on the project for a while, find themselves spending more time cross-disciplinary. They dabble in other areas, both to give themselves something interesting to do, but to also grow their skill sets and to help out where they need to. So, Jinjar says, I love the colors and it fits. Have you ever seen pics of desert cities around the world? Generally, we do a lot of research looking at different locations, finding inspiration from those locations, doing our best to come across as inspired by, but not straight up, taking one for one inspirations out of. And so there was a lot of work done at looking at, Mediterranean, looking at Southwest Asian, Middle Eastern, North African cultures and structures when it came to developing the visual language that we have for Umbar, for Ikerban, for Murjala, to make sure that we evoked the fantastical setting for these regions. Middle Earth is, Tolkien attempting to tell a prehistory of the world, so a lot of the locations have analogs in the real world, and so we try to hew as closely as we can to the suggestions of where a place might be, without too heavy-handedly saying like, this is this city, this is Cairo, or like those sorts of things. We want to make sure that we evoke the feel of what things are supposed to be without leaning too heavily into defining it as one specific culture. Alrighty, so we've looked at Zijana. Let's start heading into some dungeon interiors. So like I had said before, a lot of stuff is still in progress. A lot of deco and lighting. So some of the interiors that we're looking at, such as this one here, the space is built and intended for use by content placement and whatnot, but it is not necessarily final. We may do additional passes through here for deco and lighting, seeing what we can do to, kind of make things feel a little bit more lived in as we work through stuff. Often that can be as something as simple as, making sure there's more like clutter on the floor and whatnot. So, I really do love. There's something that just feels good about structures that you can kind of build in this way without feeling like it's too clunky. Alrighty. Let's see. Let's hit our next one. Oh, I remember making this one. This was one of the spaces that I recently made. Home of the Terror Birds. I think this is being used as part of some missions. I think this is a mission, mostly dungeon space. Has not been populated yet, but as far as I'm feeling, as far as deco and lighting goes, I'm feeling pretty, good with this. We might even get to see my placeholder bird that I put in here if it is still present. I think one of the things too that I've talked a little bit about it before, where I feel like we are regularly learning more new things about how this game operates and how our engine operates, in large part because how we were originally kind of asked to and expected to build the game, when the game launched, was a very client-focused approach. So we were focusing very much on okay, frame rate, etc. This works on this video card, and this is the frame rate that we expect to have here, and a lot of our attention has shifted now towards, okay, we kind of understand the client perf side of things. Let's learn more about the server perf side of things. How does the server interact with certain kinds of gameplay, certain kinds of asset placements and whatnot? And because previous iterations of the project never really focused as much on that. It's a lot of new learning for us and a lot of opportunity for us to kind of sit down and evaluate how we're building things. All right, next up. This one might have some stuff populating in it. I think we still have a lighting pass to work on in here, but the deco is in pretty good shape. And we got our friends, the cordyceps spiders, which I'm not sure that these are the appropriate spiders for this space if this is in Kijon. So that might be something to talk with the designer about, because we do have the sun spider model from Umbar. And it would make sense that the spiders in here would probably go with that, as opposed to going with the fungal spiders. So, and that's all stuff that we kind of approach through polish. Because what might have occurred with this is, you know, a designer, we made the spiders for Adagim, and then a designer was working on the space and was like, okay, I need spiders for this interior. I'm going to copy this, paste this, but hasn't updated the appearance of them yet. Alrighty. Next up. Oh, that's... Alright. We'll do a quick look at some of what these interiors end up looking like. You know, again, we're learning. We got a bunch of great new assets that we're using to build these spaces, and a lot of the fun of building these spaces comes in learning how to, you know, incorporate those new assets into this. So, like in this kind of interior here, you know, you kind of look at it and we're like, okay, we know how to build a Umbarem or Shigani style interior. But now we have these new assets that we want to bring in. So we have these like wall dividers, these new types of windows and whatnot, new lighting. And there's always a little bit of both glee and just like experimentation time. And sometimes that can lead to things taking a little bit longer to build than we might originally like them to, because we are still figuring out how that visual language comes together, works together. So yeah, I think sorry, I'm getting some messages from people at work last minute, like, don't go here, go here, don't go here. So we're trying to figure out like what is what is the best spaces to look at live. So that's always fun as well. Alrighty, I'm adjusting my itinerary based off of some requests. Alrighty, so we'll head into the next spot. And I think it's too, one of the things that's interesting, as, at least with the world design team, as we are adjusting to and learning how to use the new assets that we're getting, each of us also kind of puts our own little spin on how to build these spaces. You know, like, you know, Iceman versus Pearson versus myself, we all kind of approach things slightly differently when it comes to building these spaces. I had helped out in a couple of spaces we'll see down the road as far as deco and whatnot goes. I'd helped out with deco and lighting in those spaces to kind of free up some time from one of the other designers. And it's always interesting to me going into someone else's spaces and seeing what assets they're using, how they're, you know, employing them in a space. You know, so it's always just kind of interesting. Because I also, like, I do a lot of things where I will like turn off physics and stuff and rotate it and then put up physics barriers and whatnot. So like I've gotten messages from people on the team and it was like, hey, like, how did you do this? Or like, that's a really like interesting way of combining assets together. And some of that is, I think, too, us working at being more comfortable with letting physics objects, physics blockers do the work. rather than trying to, use so many assets to create an effect. We instead try to, I think especially in this expansion pack, we are experimenting a bit more with how we can rotate things to get both an economy of assets, but also more interesting shapes and styles of places. And so here we are. This is our first Ansharu dungeon space. This is the Crypts of Gadim. I think that's what this is called. Yep, Crypts of Gadim Un. This was a space too when I was building it where, because it was a crypt, I didn't really want to rely too heavily on individual lighting, because especially for things like whites and whatnot, they aren't likely to be carrying light sources around themselves. So that's why I have the player key light on me as we're running through. So the lighting in this space is fairly minimal, and the bulk of it is intended to come from the player running around. Alrighty, next we go to what I've affectionately called the dive bar of Ansharu. I bet you the designer who made it has a better name. The Camel and Chimes. We are at the Camel and Chimes. So this is in the center of Ansharu. There was the little Canag, and inside one of those buildings is a little pub. We wanted to have just a small interior here. I think there are a couple of instances for content in this space as well. But you can talk with your healer. I think I put the healer in here. I don't remember. Again, it's one of those things where I think I've mentioned before, where if I am not specifically immediately working on it, I often put it out of my mind. It was one of the dungeons that I was asked not to show today. I had just completely forgotten that I had built it. And so when he had mentioned it, I went and I went to it to take a look at it, just because I had completely forgotten that I had built it. So here we have, this is another quest-based instance interior. This one's set in the Quelling House, kind of south of Jiret Manesh in Ansharu. Very simple space, not much going on in it. I think the quest instance here is not a particularly complex one. I think it's more for story purposes than anything. But and then we also have the Throne Hall of Jiret Manesh, Geta's Meeting Hall. So the kind of the backstory behind the Temamir dwarves, at least in this region, and as far as Jiret Manesh is concerned, is the dwarves have long sequestered themselves away from the world and are now starting to kind of get back out there. And the idea of this space is that it is both the throne room and kind of the main hall under the mountain in Murjala for the Temamir dwarves. It would not shock me if we ever did anything more with this space, that it would be kind of similar to, what we did in, oh, that's interesting. We need to turn off shadows on you, buddy. That's fun. I would not be surprised if we did something similar to like what we did with Erebor, where we have the guild hall in Erebor that is connected to a larger social space around it. That is not what we're doing right now. This is more me pie in the sky, musing about the future. But there are also plenty of doors here scattered throughout that can allow us to further enrich this space if we ever so decided to. Then we have the gardens. How the dwarves survived. I've always kind of imagined the interior gardens of dwarves. It's always been fun to put a twist on dwarf stuff where you never really expect dwarves themselves to be in to have gardens because they're underneath everything. So, all right. So now we're heading off to Idegal, where we have a handful of interiors. I think I got all the ones I was asked not to visit. So the idea behind this space is it is sort of the way up into Emacs Duel itself. Oh, hello there, giant deep claw. What are you doing there? We'll pretend we didn't see you. Nothing to see here, just a giant deep claw. So the idea behind this space is it's a connective space. I think I don't know the entirety of the gameplay that is going on in here, but it is a means for players to get access to the barricaded off city of Emacs Duel. You know, from our Idegal walkthrough, you saw that I had to kind of rocket jump myself up into the city, and this acts as your first run access point to get into it. Alrighty. Let's see if we have any other questions. Epic Games TV says, how's elf housing coming along? Will we get it this year? We are not currently planning for Rivendell housing to be available as part of Update 46 or 2025. Since I am off of principal development for the expansion pack and just in polish and support mode at this point, I have kind of pivoted to working on that. So I've been building out the interiors associated with it, just getting it shipshape and ready for previews and for tests, for testing. So it is very much in progress now. I think we'll have a better time frame to announce for that once we get past the expansion pack. Alrighty. The Druid's Fire says, we have hints of it with the Gardens of Thorn's Gate and Moria, but that's a nice newer take on it. And that's another space, too, where I was playing a lot with rotating things in weird ways to kind of build a space. So, Skylight asks, do we get to experience why or how people train Mumax visually? A training pen for Mumax? Mumax is still... I'm not sure what their story involvement in either Ansharu or Idegal are, outside of the notion that they were brought there by Ordak, and then once the spaces that Ordak was using them for became unviable, stripped of resources and whatnot, the Mumak themselves were kind of abandoned. So throughout Ansharu and Idegal, you'll see pods of them here and there, camp life of them, just chilling out, doing their thing. Small families and communities that have kind of come up as part of their abandonment. T. Seltzer, I'm on it. Again, as a reminder, world design focused stream, so I'm happy to answer those kinds of questions for you. I'm not going to be able to answer questions regarding things like UI, game systems, PvMP, those sorts of things. So if you are coming here hoping to get those answers, I'm not going to be able to give them for you. I apologize. All right. Now that I've had my seltzer, let us continue on. So now we are in, let me just see. We are in Emacs Duel. So this was entertaining just as a bit of an anecdote from game design and whatnot. So the designer who was working in this space, I feel like is just living his best life right now. Between the structures we got, the plants, the pergolas, all of the deco objects, he is absolutely loving just decorating a palace. And I feel like if he had the opportunity to, this was what he would be doing with all of his time. The progress screenshots that he's been sharing as he's been working on space, like you can tell there is a almost giddiness about him as he is working on these spaces. So it's always fun to see people enjoying and having fun building out these kinds of things. I think the thing too that I enjoy a lot about this space in particular is it's got a good amount of visual noise to it, but it doesn't feel overwhelmingly so. One of the things that I was actually working on for him last week was we're getting some static skyboxes to go in here. So instead of seeing this weird horizon, you'll actually be able to see a version of the landscape surrounding the palace. But yeah, this is definitely a degree of opulence that Gondor wishes it could have. Let's see. Epic Games TV asks, any new mechanics in this update, or is it just maps, quest, and story? So we've got a level cap increase, so we get an extra 10 levels. I'm not sure what's coming as far as any skills or trait points that might come associated with that. That's outside of my wheelhouse. Landscape is my bread and butter, so that is what I'm most comfortable, giving you the information about, which is what I've been doing for the last several weeks. So yeah, as far as that goes, I would say that question, as far as mechanics and whatnot goes, best suited to Court of the Rings, or just making a post on the forums or Discord asking those kinds of questions. We do have our Boror channels open both on the forums and on Discord, so those might be great opportunities for you to ask those kinds of questions. Gondor wishes it had snake statues. Gondor wishes it had the number of statues that we got of just like nobility and whatnot. We got a lot of statues of the kings and queens of Harad for decoration and for other cool places. So we went from very opulent palatial spaces to, darker servants' quarters, kind of juxtaposing the rich lifestyle of those above with the, darker and more terrifying lifestyle of those living below the city. I always get a little lost in these kinds of spaces. It's tricky to navigate around, especially since I'm not particularly familiar with them. Alrighty. So with all of that, that concludes kind of our walkthrough of the interiors and dungeons of the region. We still have to show off the instance spaces. So today we're going to show off 3 of the 4 instance spaces that are coming with the expansion pack. One of the instance spaces, the capstone instance in Kijan, is not quite at a state where we are ready to show it off. It's very placeholdery still as we wait for assets and for additional polish. So our plan is to go through the instance in Ansharu, the main instance in Idagal, as well as the raid. We're going to take a look at the raid space too. So with that in mind, let me answer this question real quick, and then we'll head into those spaces. Pal of Nodin Zauber says, uh, how much work is it to make a housing item from an asset you use for the interiors? As long as that asset does not need to be modified in any way, if I can just use it wholesale, like this barrel, I don't need any modifications to this barrel is this barrel, and that's all it is, that's pretty quick turnaround. If it was something where I needed to bring in art to help with it, like say, for example, someone wanted, even something as simple as this, someone wanted this table with these stools arranged around it in that way. The stools are a separate asset. So that means that this would need to be grouped together into what we call an entity group, and then sent over to the art team and requested that they take this arrangement of assets and turn it into a single entity that we can then use for our housing decoration. That's why there was a great big thread on the old forums, and also now there's new versions of it on the new forums of people requesting certain things for housing items. And a lot of those things are things that I can do as one-off entities, but a number of them are also like, oh, I really like this garden bed arrangement where it's like a garden bed with a bush and a bunch of flowers and a tree, and at that point it's like 20 objects, and because it's 20 objects, I can't just instantly turn it into a housing object. I need to group it together, send it over to art. As long as art has time for it, they can then take that and turn it into a single object. So, alrighty. So we are heading into our instances. You'll see it is TBD onshrew instance. We are still waiting on some names for things as well. This space, this is the second version of the space that I built. The first version was built using tiles, and we were having some issues with gameplay. So it was requested that we build this space using normal means instead. So we're giving this one a go and see how well this works. One of the things too that was interesting for me in building this space is this is a space built that for the first time I'm building with our new concepts of like client only and low physics in general. So a lot of this space is outside of the floors and whatnot. Not really something that you can engage with, you can bump into as far as physics goes. There's walls up and whatnot to kind of limit movement through a space, simplify the physics of things. A lot of stuff is set as client only in here. You know, only things that isn't client only are things that are actually physical blockers in the space. So we're trying some new approaches to building our dungeon spaces in order to help them, you know, perform a little bit better, and also just kind of explore, you know, changes that we could make to how our build process is to improve performance on a variety of fronts. One of the things that I'm enjoying too in playing in this space is is that it is dynamically lit. So it will take information from the day file of the space. So right now it's using the onshrew day file. So the lighting will change based off of the time of day information that's in the day file. We do that once in a while, but not a ton. But it's a fun thing to do, especially in a space like this where we're treating it as open to sky, even though it's not really open to sky. Alrighty, so we'll continue on through here. Make our way up. So it looks like there's still some things that we need to adjust and polish in this space, particularly this. It's not supposed to be open, it should be closed off. But this is our final boss encounter room. So I think the thing that was fun for me as far as building the space goes is the challenge of portraying something that feels like it's an actual outdoor space while being completely contained within a cell mesh. We don't do that too often, but it's a fun exercise and a fun challenge to try to make that happen. we'll make our way back up here, and then we'll head on to the next one. So next up, Emox Duel has a 6-person instance. I believe this one, I think this one's a 3-person instance, but I'm not entirely sure. This one might be a 6-person instance too, and the Kijan's 3-person. I think that's actually what it is. So teleport in. So we have another take on the kind of palace. This is another section of the palace, I believe. Oh, hello, door. What's going on? All right. And the joys of development. Alrighty, let me get myself out of here. That says to me that there were some floors that were set to be client only. That should not be client only. Yep, right there. Alrighty. Well, I'm taking that note down for myself. I think we'll need to do a pass on the client-only aspect of things for this space before we get too much further into letting people try this out. So we'll put a pin in this and head on over into the raid. So the raid is set in Adagim. So unlike having a progression, basically, where it's like the first region you go to, second region, and then the last one would have the raid. Adagim is the first region that you go to as part of the expansion pack, and is where the raid is, which is ostensibly the last instance that you would participate in as part of the expansion pack. So, got some little things here and there to fix, like the Z fighting, but that's an easy fix. But otherwise, I'm liking the look and feel of this. We brought in all the fungal assets to bear. Let's see, can I go through this? I cannot go through this. All right. So this is the lobby space for the raid. So the way this raid is being built is, so with Utukbur, we had this idea of having a public lobby with private wings, basically. So each wing of Utukbur is its own instance. And then you come back out into the public lobby to barter, to quest reward, to repair, except to meet up. Player feedback on that was that they would much prefer it all being one instance space, even if it meant teleporting, that it all be one instance as opposed to several instances. So that's what we're attempting to achieve with this raid, where you have your lobby space here. No combat, I believe, is going to be happening in this space. And then off of it, we have several wings that spoke off of it. We've got one to the left, one to the right, one straight ahead, and then there's a fourth wing that I'm not going to visit today. I don't want to spoil things. But that fourth wing will be accessible from this space, but is not going to be immediately accessible as you need to make progression through the instance itself. So, that first stage artist. I honestly love it when we explore every corner of an area and find a hidden no collision asset that allows you to take a kind of secret tunnel through a rock or all the way through a blocking space A to B. Reminds me of childhood. Well, the idea being that we don't have those spaces that you find, that we try to resolve those issues before they get into players' hands. However, something like Bullroar is an opportunity to do that kind of exploration without fear. So now this is the spider wing of the instance. If you could not already tell, there's spider stuff abound throughout here. Along with some scorpion things. We were really working with with Corsairs of Umbar, or not Corsairs, Legacy of Morgoth, with wanting the iconography for Shagani structures to be the scorpion. I think if there was anything we could have done to better sell this architectural set culturally, it would have been to try to incorporate that visual language more into things. I think we could have worked harder at that. But I'm otherwise very happy with this set, and particularly these kinds of structures here, these arches and whatnot. They are really honestly like shape forms that we don't have anywhere else in the game, and it's, you know, like I was saying when we were looking in Zajana, it's really interesting shape forms that I'm looking forward to using more, and finding opportunities to use more. Druidfire said, Scorpions don't have an iconic image other than themselves, unlike spiders and cobwebs. That is very true. I think if you go to certain spider camps and whatnot, what those spaces look like, what the camps look like, compared to what a Scorpion camp looks like in Umbar, is in Ikerban, it's very different. There's definitely a language there that exists that is both easier for people to look at and comprehend. I think, you know, you look at something and you can immediately say, ah, yes, spider. Whereas Scorpion is much harder to kind of have that same kind of feeling. It's less evocative. Alrighty. We'll head on into the next wing. So here we are. This is ostensibly this is called the Troll Wing. I don't know what's been placed in it yet, but it's a fairly simple space as far as that goes. Let's see. So we have a couple questions about the size and scope of raid spaces. You know, I think while we are still working to figure out performance in our 64-bit client world, we are opting to go a little bit safer as far as the visual and world design of these spaces go. You know, I think, you know, the Shelob raid, for example, is a space that I think a lot of people a lot of people kind of recall when they're thinking about like big grand spaces. But we're also still figuring out like what is performance like in 64-bit servers? How do we address the issues with lag and whatnot? And going with these kind of more smaller discrete spaces, at least while we're figuring all of this stuff out, is beneficial. You know, it helps remove vectors of complexity. You know, if we were to build this on landscape, it would be more complex because it would be, you know, multiple land blocks, it would be the height map, it would be the weather systems that are associated with it. There's just more going on with building bigger, grander spaces. And until we have a good handle on the perf issues that we're working on, that our engineering team is working on, it is generally safer for us to build spaces that are to build spaces that can be more performant in scope if they're smaller. So I know that is not the ideal answer for a lot of people, but that is kind of the approach that we are trying to take with this, is reduce complexity of the actual spaces, the physical complexity of spaces, and hope that that is a way for us to pin down where our issues are. All right, I'm not going to be able to get through that, so I'm going to just go through this so that we can take a look at the final boss room of this wing. This is, I think, I forget what creatures are in here. But yeah, Oh, now I can select it. Delete. Alrighty. So we'll run in here real quick to take a look at stuff. And I think that'll just about wrap things up for our trip through the interiors of everything. Like I said, there's still one more wing in this space that we're not going to reveal right now. Kind of keep that as a surprise for when testing and for when it launches. So, alrighty. So, I think with that, I'm going to take a look at the questions real quick to see if there's anything I can answer. There are certainly some things that are stuff outside of my wheelhouse that I'm seeing in here that I don't have a strong answer for you. So there are questions about things like how hotspots interact with stuff and ground targeting. Those are things that, the spaces we are building for the expansion pack are being tailored to try to minimize those issues while we kind of figure out what's going on. So again, questions about specific things. Volden asks, what about Hidden Horde? That was appropriately scaled in my opinion and has very few performance issues related to the raid space. Again, I don't have good answers for those kinds of questions. I am working off of the information and the requests that are being asked of us based off of what our engineers are seeing and what we're seeing from player feedback. So we're trying to, at least for this cycle anyways, have these spaces be as simple as we can make them be so that we can eliminate complexity as a performance issue or behavior issue in those spaces. Mariala says, one question about landscapes. I think there is an argument to be made that the older zones were smaller. If we look at the number of land blocks or something like Swamp Through the Carlon, they are significantly larger than the average zone back in the early years. Without things like frill, they can feel artificially inflated. Was this increase in size a conscious decision? Yes, it was. It was an attempt for us to see how big we could produce something and how much we could leverage landscape systems to make landscape systems and just points of interest as opportunities for emergent exploration that don't necessarily have gameplay in them. It's a learning process, I think, for all of us to kind of work through that. Content designers often want to just fill everything everywhere with everything. And as we build larger spaces, it's a lot of retraining us to think, okay, we don't need to fill everything everywhere. Let's focus on a main line through a space. And then rely on the world team to place points of interest and other things of interest on the landscape that can be more for emergent, non-content based experiences. So you can explore, you can run across things. One of the things too that I'm working on in my own spare time are ideas and prototypes for game systems that don't require placement on landscape, so that we can do these bigger regions and still find ways to have emergent gameplay and have gameplay interest on the landscape without needing to place a ton of quest objects, without needing to, do a lot of intensive landscape work. One of the ones that I've been working on recently was thinking about the rare monster system and how that system requires a lot of very specific event creation, placement, patrol placement, all of that. And that's a lot of work. Where if we can find a system that bases whether or not a rare monster spawns off of a player's activity as opposed to hanging out and waiting at a spawn point for something to respawn. So it's those sorts of things, trying to find ways to add interest to the landscape, but don't add a lot of placement to the landscape. All right, so I'm running a little over, so I'm going to wrap it up right now. But thank you everyone for hanging out and asking your questions, for chilling out for these last several weeks as we went through all of the expansion pack regions. I apologize to those of you that I was not able to answer your questions satisfactorily. Like I said, not everything is in my wheelhouse. I can only answer so many things. But yeah, so thank you everyone for hanging out. I believe we've got a few more rounds of Bull Roar expected for the expansion pack. Most recent one, Kijan, is either live now or coming up soon. I have not looked at everything today to see where that is in progress. But there will also be Idagal for that, as well as doing instance-specific Bull Roars as things continue and we march towards our release date. As always, pay attention to the message board, social media, Discord for any sorts of announcements coming up. Also, if you have not yet done so, we do have our Return to Middle Earth code out there. So feel free to use that on your accounts if you have not done so yet. I think that expires within the next week or so. So make sure you get in and get that as well. So yeah, thank you everyone. I hope you have a great afternoon. And I'm going to take November off from streaming, and we'll see you in December. Have a great one, everyone.